Welcome to Childcare Rockstar Radio. I am your host, Chris Murray. Childcare leaders around the globe are breaking through challenges, leading the way in innovation, testing new best practices, and impacting children and families in a much more powerful and positive way than ever before. Each week, join me for interviews with early childhood leaders and experts that will leave you inspired to become the next childcare rockstar. Now, let's go. This is Childcare Rockstar Radio, episode 120, featuring Carol Levins. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Chris Murray here, your host, and I am thrilled to have you back. I have an amazing episode queued up for you today. I've titled it, An ECE Pioneer, The Secrets of Her Success. And we're talking about none other than Miss Carol Levins. She is a force to be reckoned with and an early pioneer of multi-site success and even into franchising in the Las Vegas area. She created a school from nothing and ended up with a business of 14 locations serving over 3,500 children and 350 employees. So may I say she's a badass. And we're going to hear the inside scoop never told before right here on this podcast. I got the scoop, everybody. So I am so excited because meeting Carol and hopefully having a friendship with her long-term is going to be one of the highlights of my career. I have a feeling. We are both skiers and very passionate about education, entrepreneurship. And what you're going to learn from Carol is there are some mind-blowing secrets. Just a few to tease you. She talks about how to keep team members, how to keep teachers with you for 20 to 35 years. You heard that right. Her typical teacher longevity in terms of employment length was 20 to 35 years. That was typical. And so we talk specifically about the ways that she crafted her teaching positions, the benefits, the structure and nature of the position, the job descriptions, so that she could elevate her teachers and let them do amazing work of teaching and educating and not have to do things like cleaning classrooms, for example. So there were some secrets to her method that I think that anybody listening to this podcast can adopt, learn from, and get success from. Another one is how she designed her schools from the ground up. She had a specific floor plan that was purpose-built for her and her vision and her why. And we'll hear about that. We hear all about her exit strategy and how she came to the eventual sale of her business, was thinking about it a decade before it happened, and then walked away from that, and then sold it a decade later when it felt right. And so we learn about being emotionally ready, and we learn about not being desperate and being willing to walk away from the deal. And we talk about operational consistency, branding consistency, and how you can structure your multi-site business to be systems-based so that everything has consistency and the same parent, the parent from one end of town to the other end of town experiences the same experience at your school. We talk about marketing and enrollment and how she actually went door to door before the school was even built with plans, architectural plans, and all the bells and whistles, features, and benefits of the school, and met with families in a in-home consult. Since she didn't have a school to tour yet, she brought the school to them, to their kitchen or dining room table, and literally built her enrollment family by family in that process and opened with a full school. I think, if not every time, almost every time she opened a new location. So I've never heard of that enrollment strategy before, and that's a writer downer. So I'll invite you to think differently about what's possible as you listen to this podcast, because we're taking it back. We're dialing the time capsule back to learn from Carol and all of her amazing success strategies. Before we dig in and learn about that, I have two companies to thank for being sponsors of today's show, and that is IntelliKids. IntelliKids Systems has a new employee management system. It brings communication and marketing automation to all of your recruitment efforts. Move candidates seamlessly through the hiring process, from submitting applications through onboarding and even post-employment communication. Use multiple schedules to have candidates book both virtual and in-person interviews themselves without you having to spend time chasing them. Simply put, with IntelliKids Systems, it's a whole new way to handle staffing and recruitment. And of course, started out with with a CRM system, well, customer relationship management system for the childcare space at IntelliKidsSystems.com, I believe, is their website, or just Google IntelliKids Systems. And we hear more about IntelliKids inside the podcast because Carol, our featured guest, was the pilot school for her son, Jared, to develop IntelliKids Systems software. So we'll hear more about that here in a moment. We also want to thank our other podcast sponsor, our partner, LifeCubby. Tired of dealing with broken crayons or dried up finger paints? In need of new cubbies? LifeCubby wants to help. When you sign up for their award-winning childcare management software, they'll give you the entire amount of your contract back in new school supplies. Holy cow. And free supplies won't be the only thing you'll earn with LifeCubby. You'll also get hours back each day by digitizing tedious tasks like daily sheets, diaper logs, and parent communication. To sign up for LifeCubby at your school or center and score up to $4,000 in free school supplies, visit lifecubby.com and use code CCSCBOGO at checkout. You'll quickly see why centers across the nation are switching to the easiest to use childcare software. Again, lifecubby.com and use code CCSCBOGO, BOGO, at checkout. All right. Thank you, LifeCubby, and thank you, IntelliKids Systems. Let's dive right in. I want you to meet Carol right away, and you're going to love her as much as I do. A childcare pioneer with the children at the core of everything that she did, and just an amazing leader and entrepreneur. So enjoy episode 120 here at Childcare Rockstar Radio. Welcome back, everybody, to Childcare Rockstar Radio. I am Chris Murray, your host, and I am thrilled to introduce you to Carol Levins. Carol, how are you?
I'm good today. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Where are you right now?
Well, I am actually in Park City, Utah. I reside between there and Las Vegas.
Very good. And here in February 22, it sounds like you and I are both getting snow in the mountains of Utah and Colorado, respectively. So that's kind of cool.
Very good.
Love the moisture. Carol, tell us a little bit about your journey. How and why did you start a preschool and childcare business? And how long have you been doing this work?
Well, I was one of those odd kids who knew what I wanted to do when I was 5 years old. I went to kindergarten and I loved it. I loved learning. I loved every day. I couldn't wait to go to school. And as I progressed through elementary school, I decided I wanted to be, well, at first a teacher, then a principal. And finally, by the time I'm out of high school, I want to own my own school. So I go and get my degree in early childhood education, and I work throughout high school and college and get a lot of experience in the classroom. And that was how it started, just a passion for learning.
So when did you first start your preschool business?
Well, I was in the right place at the right time in 1980 in Las Vegas, as it was the fastest growing town in the United States. And I started my first preschool in Las Vegas. And it was, I designed the building because I had grown up in a family that built homes, and my mother was kind of like the designer for the homes that my dad built. So I had a design that I wanted for a childcare center. And I had very specific requirements from having worked in centers, what I wanted. So I bought a piece of land, and I went to the bank and said, this is my idea. And at the time, the interest rates were 18%.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't do this. That was 1979. And I go, that's ridiculous. And so I waited a year. 1980, I can't wait any longer. This is what I want to do. And the interest rates were 22%.
Oh my goodness.
So my thought was, well, I guess I will just have the bank as a partner. And of course, all the wild ride with interest rates and the economy. So it all settled down. Yeah, but that's how I got started.
So kind of, fast forwarding to the height of your business, how did you build it out? Kind of what was the scope of, what did the company look like at its heyday after you grew it?
Okay, so what happened was I opened that first school, and remarkably, we opened completely full because I did something rather unique. There was no internet or anything, or Facebook or any way to advertise other than stick a sign on a piece of property, and hopefully people would drive by. I took flyers and I put them on everybody's door in the neighborhood, and they would call me, and I would go and make a home visit, and I would show them the plans of the school, and I would show them the curriculum, and I registered everybody to open that school full with a waiting list. And I thought, that wasn't so hard. So I opened another one, and every few years I would open another one. And then at the fullest, I had 14 schools that I was operating.
Wow.
And each time I would build, I built the first design maybe 3 times. And then I thought, well, I could do this a little bit different and maybe improve on something, because you really never know till you live in a building how it's going to work. And so I had probably 3 building designs. And the very last one that I built 3 times, there's nothing I would change about it. It was extremely attractive and extremely functional. And I was very involved in the real estate part of it as well as the business part. So I had 14 schools, and I had probably at the heyday 350 employees and close to 3,000 students.
Wow. And then you exited the business. And when did you exit the business? How long ago?
Well, I'll tell you a little story about that.
Okay.
Over the course of my 40 years owning Creative Kids Learning Centers, which was the name of my business, I had people come and say, would you like to sell your business? So I wasn't at all interested in the first one. And then the second one was probably 10 years before I finally exited. And I went through all the process, learned a lot about how you do that. And I still felt like somebody was cutting my arm off. I couldn't do it. I just wasn't ready to, I had more that I wanted to do. And I always loved what I was doing. So it wasn't like I needed to get out. And I told the guy, I remember it was right up to the wire, like, okay, you got to make this decision. I said, I think you're about 10 years too soon. And so, that was the end of that conversation. I continue on, I built some more schools. And then almost 10 years to the day, I get a cold call. And somebody says, hey, we've heard about your reputation, and we're in the business of acquiring more schools. Are you interested? I said, I like what I do, but at this point, I'll listen. And then ensued about 9 months worth of negotiations. And so I actually exited February 1st of 2017. So just about 5 years ago.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask you more about that whole journey. But before I get there, if you could share a little bit about your home life, what do you enjoy and what's going on for you at home? I guess when you're you're splitting your time between Vegas and Park City. So tell us a little bit about home. Are you traveling? What are you doing these days?
Well, I'm married to my husband, David. We have 6 grown children. We have, in a few months, it will be 8 grandchildren.
Wow.
All of which are boys. I know I yet to get a granddaughter, but I've got more kids that aren't married yet that will end up giving me more grandchildren. So we're hoping for that. We do travel a lot. We go back and forth. I've traveled all over the world and all over Europe. And, with the current situation, that's kind of been on kind of on the back burner with traveling with the pandemic. And so,
Sure.
So we're just back and forth between Park City, Utah and Las Vegas, but I love to ski. I love being with my family and reading, and those would be my hobbies.
Wonderful. Share with us, Carol, if you will, a fun fact. What is something that not too many folks know about you?
Well, interestingly enough, to be a leader in any business, you would not associate this characteristic, but I was a pretty shy kid. And I worked really hard my life to not be shy. And so to associate that with somebody who's achieved the kinds of things that I have, kind of like an oxymoron, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you have overcome or just gotten so much accomplished in your life. You've got to be so proud. I'm interested in the design aspect of your schools because I know that all of the owners and leaders listening are fascinated with elements of school design and different features and benefits that may or may not tie to your curriculum or your philosophy, your approach. So what were some things either early days or later that design-wise you feel that set your brand or your schools apart? What did you really love?
Well, I can tell you that branding is very important. You want to have a strong brand. And with multiple sites, you want a person to be able to walk into your building and know that they are secure in that brand because they may have heard it from somebody who's across town, or they may have even attended a different school of yours. So the branding is really important. The other thing that I felt was very important was that when you walk through the front door, you get one chance at a first impression. So, even before you walk in the front door, when you park in the parking lot, you got to see that building looks clean. It's, up to date. It's well taken care of. You don't have dead plants in the entryway. All of these things add up in a person's mind when they don't even know it. So when they walk in the front door, then they need to be greeted properly. You need to have an entryway that is attractive and appealing. And I was really big on, it's just my personality. I'm really big on details and organization. And that worked for me. It helped me to train my people so that the brand was consistent. If you walk into one school, you're going to get treated this way. You walk into the next one, you're going to get treated the same way. You're going to get a tour in a certain manner. You're going to be shown the classrooms, and you're going to see the children actively at play. You're going to see and feel that curriculum. And to know that not just the classroom and the layout of the building flows well, but that the playgrounds are safe and attractive. I wish I had some pictures to show you of my buildings, and maybe I can send you some, but they were absolutely beautiful. I spent 40 years perfecting it. And a lot of the things that I also helped me was because I had in my, youth, 16 to 25 or whatever, I had been in a classroom. I knew what it was like to have a group of 3-year-olds in a classroom. Mm-hmm. So you had to always have safety first. No blind spots. You go out to the playground, no place where a child could get behind the corner of a building and you couldn't see them.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And so obviously you were building these buildings from dirt, from the ground up. And so that was helping you achieve brand consistency. What about operational consistency? Like, what were some things as a CEO of this education company you really sought to drive through your organization culturally and operationally to maintain that consistency? Because across 14 schools, that's a lot of locations, right? So what were some of your secrets of that approach?
Well, we had a very, very strong culture. People would stayed in my company for 20 to 35 years. Wow. That was not abnormal to have people stay that long. And it was because I believe that my leadership style was to see the strengths that people have and to tap into their strengths, to make them feel good about themselves, like you would with a child. There's not a whole lot of difference between the psychology in early childhood. We're all human, so it doesn't matter how big you are. You still want to feel good about what you're doing, and you want to have the balance between expectations and autonomy. So, I would make sure that they knew what I was expecting, but, tell me how you're going to get there and see if we can't give that person the growth that they want to have personally. We had a lot of people who came to us as young mothers and needed to have childcare while they worked. So we gave free childcare. And it was great because people would stay, because if they went to work somewhere else, they would have to pay for childcare, and that was going to cut into their salary too much.
Right.
So there was that, and we had a very strong staff at the intermediate supervisory level, or just below me. As my company grew, I certainly couldn't do it all myself. I had a wonderful supervisory staff, and they would maybe have a very small, which is not the norm, but 3 or 4 schools each to supervise. Mm-hmm. A lot of big companies, they'll have one supervisor over 10 or 12 schools. And I did not want a crisis management. I wanted proactive management. I wanted to make sure that you don't wait until something is a crisis to try to solve the problem. So we were always thinking ahead of what you need to do to make sure that people know what's expected of them for their job. Mm-hmm. And that made people feel successful. So I'd say that was what was really important about our culture.
I love that. I really consider you to be one of the early empire builders in our field. And that's why I really wanted to bring Carol on to the podcast. Just an amazing growth of what you accomplished as one of the early, really female entrepreneurs in this industry. So I love the story. Of course, with success comes challenges. So tell us a little bit more about maybe one or two of the big challenges that you faced, Carol, during your journey, and how did you overcome those?
Whenever a business starts out, you start out with 1 location, and then 2, and then 3. As you grow, I call them growing pains. You have to adjust. There's a point in the beginning where I could do it all myself, and then I couldn't. I couldn't be 5 places at once, right. And it was. Then you have to be sure that you have people that will work in your stead and would make decisions the same way that you would. So communication was a huge thing, a challenge that you were always addressing. And I used to be called the form master. That was what my staff called me, because I would make a form so that I would get feedback from them. And we're talking before computers, okay? Before you could just pick up your phone and know what's going on. Right. So they would fill out forms, and I would get this feedback, and I would know what was going on. Some of the things that we couldn't control, that we just had to kind of ride the wave out, would be when 9/11 hit. I had opened a school 2 weeks before 9/11 hit. Wow. And people were afraid to leave their home. They didn't want to even put their kid in school. I mean, people were scared of everything. Right. And then you go to 2008, and everybody's losing their job, and every other person's walking in and saying, I lost my job. I love it here, but I can't keep my child here. So those, 5 years of that recession was really difficult, because we had to keep ratios, which means we had to let some people go. And then as we got the children back, I'm sure people experienced that with the pandemic too, which I luckily was out before that happened. But my heart goes out to people that had to, survive that kind of time. So, I don't think mine was as bad, but still those were challenges, and to continue to grow and to make certain decisions that maybe weren't popular, but you knew it was in the best interest of the business. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example of that. It was during the recession. You've got less children than you would normally have, so you've got to let some people lay off and so forth. But I decided that there was a couple of buildings that needed a facelift, so I decided I would give them that facelift to modernize them. And people were mad at me because I was spending my money to do that. But then in hindsight, what happened was people thought it was a brand new school, and they came there because it looked different.
Right.
And so both inside and out, we remodeled some of the schools, and it was an unpopular decision at first, and then everybody was happy about it because they got their jobs that were more secure. Of course, you have to have children to have a job.
Yeah, love that. That's a great example. I bet when you went through 2007, because you'd sold in 2017, you got an offer that you thought about in 2007. It sounds like a decade prior.
Right.
And so right after you said, no, I'm not ready to sell yet, the next year, we went into recession. So were you questioning at that time? Were you going like, oh, maybe I should have sold?
I absolutely was beating myself up. Without a doubt, I was beating myself up. But in those 10 years, I think I built 2 more schools, or maybe 3 more schools. And then when I did sell my business, not only had I been successful during those 10 years, I actually yielded more value because I had a larger company and things were really going well by the time I sold. And that's a whole nother topic, but valuation of your business, how that is established.
Yeah, absolutely. The valuation piece, the profit and loss financial statements, making sure that you're watching profit margin, and being tied into the money side of your business. We find, Carol, that in coaching, that's perhaps the big difference maker between people that can scale and are successful and people that stay small with one school and are unable to get out of the day-to-day is because they're not focused enough on the money side. So can you speak a little bit to best practices around just being a solid money manager or focusing on those aspects of your business as you grew?
Absolutely. And this is something that I realize is a challenge for a lot of owners. In fact, when I did not accept that offer 10 years previously, in those 10 years, I also had decided that I needed an exit strategy at some point. And so I went through the process of setting up a franchise so that I would be the franchisor and I would sell my brand and all my curriculum, all my ways of doing things. Did the whole book, like this big of how to run a Creative Kids Learning Center. And then I realized that when I was looking for franchisees, how difficult it is to find a person who not only is passionate about early childhood and understands preschool and the children and how they learn and all of that, and at the same time understands how to run the business. Now, you might find 2 partners that can do that. You might find a team, husband and wife, 2 sisters, whatever, mother, daughter, but it's hard to find one person that has that balance of understanding the business and understanding that some of your decisions are based on what is best for all your decisions is what is best for the child. But at the same time, how can you balance the fact that your money is going to be coming in? You have to be smart and you have to make unpopular decisions sometimes, but you've got to have your thumb on the pulse. So you have to have the feedback. You have to understand your financials and you have to know what you can afford. Now, we didn't have it was interesting because a lot of schools, and I've been asked this question over the years, well, what is your budget? How do you set up a budget? I just kind of had this intrinsic feel for what I knew it could be afforded and what, you had to wait for. And we had wonderfully supplied schools and teachers would make requisitions for supplies. They were hardly ever denied. And I think that was part of the culture too. They knew that they could have what they needed to get their job done. And we had a janitorial company that came in every single night. Teachers did not have to
clean,
wear so many hats, and some schools have to do that. And even though that was a big cost, it gave something back to us. It gave it back in morale. It gave it back in that, I'm a nut about things being clean and neat anyway. So it was like, that's what parents loved about it.
Right. And I love that. I think setting up your school to appreciate teachers and get them into the teaching role and not necessarily have to make them also be clean or cleaning, and elevating them in their own self-concept also helps you with staff retention. And obviously, if you were keeping teachers for 20 to 30 years, I mean, that's just insane. And I'm sure helped you in your profitability because you didn't have a revolving door of staff. And that means that you likely did not have a revolving door of parents because parents hate when staff leave. And so that's the consistency piece too. So that's very, very smart, Carol. And that just all fed your bottom line because then you were able to not have to spend money on retention, on turnover rather. So love that. So that was one of your secrets of success. And I think, when you look at what we try to do is we benchmark financial statements and give people their typical costs of where they spend their money in categories. And supplies is a very small percentage of your overall budget. The two big factors, number one, labor by and far, for a school, and then your real estate. So you were building your real estate and working with banks and lenders to make sure that you were financially smart when you were making your real estate decisions, I'm sure. And then with your labor, you were watching your labor costs. And if you do those two things, the rest of it, you can pretty much order whatever supplies the teachers want because it's a small.
It wasn't hard. It wasn't hard to give them what they needed and make them feel good about themselves. And we did a lot of in-house training. To help the teachers feel good about themselves and to improve our quality, we taught CDA classes for 20 some years. People could earn their degree while they were working, and we would give them the class on their lunch hour, and if they wanted to spend their lunch hour getting their degree, they could do that in the workplace. That was hugely successful. And we had, we wrote a whole bunch of like modules of different kinds of aspects, because a lot of people that come to work for you, either they have a varied background or they're just not that experienced. I found the most success was to train the people myself. Then I got what I wanted,
Right. Yeah. So you were doing CDAs in-house, and then with training, you were doing in-house training. These days, people are using training videos and online resources. Like we have our friends over at Child Care Education Institute, et cetera. But I think in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, you were doing things, I'll say you were doing things a little bit more old school, but certainly you were also, again, consistency of operation. If you're doing all your in-house training and support, that specific standards are going to be met.
And the most important thing is to understand what your mission statement is. Our mission statement, and we had it right on the parent board, right there for, as you go through the tour, this is what our mission statement is to provide the highest quality early childhood educational program available. And if you always say that, then everything, whether it be the cleanliness of the facility, whether it be greeting the child when they walk in the door, whether it be making sure that you have a substitute list and they're trained so that when the teachers are out, you still maintain your consistency of your program. Those things are providing a high quality program where we had lesson plans, we had curriculum, we taught the teachers how to do it. We sent our directors to conferences every year so that they could feel, part of the entire industry that's out there in the world. And those things were highly successful in the morale. Morale is important. It's something that I think a lot of schools might struggle with. And, it's how you build your culture and how you build your loyalty. And that makes you successful as an owner.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And so that kind of segues us to that topic of leadership. Hiring good leaders and supervisors for your schools was key. Did you ever have a time, I'm sure you did, when you had to help leaders either shift their behaviors, you had to let go of potentially leaders that were starting to get, I don't want to necessarily use the word toxic, but they ended up not being a good fit with your program. So you have to, as a CEO, really trying to pull up your bootstraps and sometimes let go of leaders that maybe aren't serving you. So did you have to go through that too?
For all the years, and we're talking close to 40 years that I ran my business, 95% of the time, we grew our own administrators. Okay, that means they started as teachers or even as substitutes. We became teachers, and then I would see their strengths and I would promote them to the next level and the next level. And sometimes, they didn't even realize it themselves that they wanted to be an office assistant or be a assistant director, and then up to being a director. And then the level above that was a supervisor, an area supervisor. But they knew the roots of the organization because they were theirs. And my point was that you could identify with the people who work under you if you have been in their shoes. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really important. But so we had almost everybody. If we ever hired from outside somebody, we needed a director and we had to hire and there was nobody I could promote, it didn't always work out that great. So at times, even when we were guilty of promoting beyond someone's capability, I rarely had somebody quit. What I ended up doing was saying, would you like to go back into the classroom? And they were, yes, yes, yes. When somebody's in over their heads, they know it, right. You know? So they didn't want to leave, but they just didn't want that job anymore. And we would move people around so that they felt good about what they were doing.
Right. Love that. So let's shift and talk about your exit. So when you sold, what are some lessons that you learned during your exit that others may be able to learn from?
Okay, that's a good one because I thought about this as I told the story where I didn't feel like I could leave because it was like killing me, like giving away one of my children or something, you know. When it came to the time when I actually did sell, I thought it was interesting because during the negotiations, if I wasn't really getting what I wanted, I'd say, you know what, forget it. I like what I do. I'll just I'm not an 80-year-old woman who has to quit now, or I'm not sick, thank goodness, and right. I can keep going. So, but wait a minute, let's talk about this again. So you don't want to be desperate is my point. You don't want to get to the point where you have to sell because you can no longer run the business. I think that puts you at a disadvantage when you're negotiating to exit. So the other thing is probably to make sure that the person, that you are well balanced while you're working. You have to have, some people are workaholics, and then when they sell, they don't know what to do with themselves. So you got to have some hobbies, you got to enjoy life, and you got to be emotionally ready to exit, or you will feel like you just have no purpose, and everybody has to feel like they have purpose.
Yes.
So, while you're still actively running your business, you need to think about that you can't do it forever, and you've got to have something that you enjoy doing. You don't have to start another business if you don't want to, but you need to enjoy certain parts of your life set them up, hobbies, whatever, so that when you do sell, you don't feel like you're lost.
Right.
I like design work. I like to build homes. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. I built homes in Scottsdale and Utah and Las Vegas, and I'm just having a kick with that. So
that's fantastic. I love that. Being a huge real estate fan myself, I love that. That's really fun. So those are great lessons, Carol. I love you got to be willing to walk away. The don't be desperate and don't start counting your money before the deal is done. You have to be able to let go of all of that and walk away if it's just not going right or if it's not feeling right. So I absolutely love that. And
you have to ask yourself why you're in the business in the first place. I mean, if you're in the business because you just think you're going to make a lot of money, that's great. But maybe you're in the business too because you just love doing what you're doing and you feel like it really makes a difference in your community. And so you feel like, it's like if somebody ever asked me, what would I do differently if I could do it over again? I wouldn't do anything differently. I loved what I did. And when I exited, it was okay. I wasn't to the point where I couldn't continue to do other things and enjoy myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know a lot of folks listening to this admire you because there's a lot of pain out there in our industry from owners and leaders who haven't been able to master these things. And I just commend you, Carol, with sharing with us these things. I think one of the secrets of your success, and I'm going to ask you in a minute about resources, and we have some closing questions, but I feel like the staffing, the component of having your team with longevity, and that you gave free childcare, which a lot of people don't do now because they see it as a cost center and they're not willing to give up those margin points. But everything that you did to engender loyalty with your team, I feel, was one of the main secrets of your success. And the other thing I love is that you started out filling your schools to the brim, full with a wait list when you open doors on day one, which is a huge game changer that most people don't do. And the fact that you did it old school by going around and putting door hangers on and then meeting with people in their homes. I actually don't know of anybody that's done that. So
I came with my little briefcase, and I showed them the floor plan and I walked them through the building. This would be your classroom that your 3-year-old would be in, or so forth. Here's our curriculum. Here's a sample lesson plan. And people felt like, oh, I can't wait. I can't wait and times were different. I don't think there was as much competition. I mean, sure. It was a smaller town. I mean, Vegas, when I started, was probably 300,000 people. And now it's like almost 3 million. So, it really does depend on where you're located. And we were building purpose-built buildings, not to say anything wrong about converted buildings, but when you build a purpose-built building, you can ensure certain things that are critical to the quality of your program. For example, you can ensure that design so there's no blind spots, and it's safer. We had our bathrooms inside each classroom, so children never were unsupervised going to a bathroom. Mm-hmm. And you never had to walk through a classroom to get to another classroom. Mm-hmm. So you didn't disturb what was going on in that first room. And all of these things are components that I've thought about since I was like 16 years old, and I find that I carried around with me. This is what my building's going to look like. So, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. And loyalty, to address that again, it works both ways. I believe that if you want loyal staff, you've got to be a loyal owner. Mm-hmm. You've got to be as loyal to them as you expect them to be loyal to you. So it's a two-way street.
Absolutely love it. Totally agree. So what are a couple books that have had the biggest impact on you as a leader and or entrepreneur? It can be inside of ECE or outside the industry.
Well, I went to college for this degree. And of course, I read a lot of books on it, but there was a speaker, and it was a book. I don't know if anybody would even remember this book, although it was pretty famous. It was called How Children Learn. It was by a guy named John Gott, I believe was his name. Holt, that's it, John Holt, okay. Holt. Mm-hmm. And he wrote the book in 1967. And he came to speak. I'm going to date myself here. Okay. He came to speak in my college class in like 1973. Okay. And I remember that the thing that was so fascinating to me was he was talking about how children learn, and then they learn with all 5 senses. Okay. So you need to provide an environment and understand what it's like to be a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old. And if you're going to own a school, and he wasn't really talking about to owners or people necessarily in the class, maybe they were going to be teachers, whatever. But if you don't understand how a 2-year-old learns, or how a 3-year-old learns, or any preschool age child, you really can't build a successful program. Right. And so that was very impactful to me. Before I owned my schools, I directed a school. I was 21 years old, and I directed a school for owners who lived out of the country. They lived in Germany. I was in California at the time, and they hired me to run their school. And it was such a great experience because I was able to develop my own methodology, if you will, and all the practices of making the curriculum and the school. I could practice what I was going to do for my own business someday, because I knew at that point I was going to own my own school someday. But that book was very impactful, and it was mostly impactful because if you do realize what the child's experience is, that's the format from which springs everything. You want that child to have a good experience at whatever age level he is in your program.
Love that. Any other books, or is that that's the one, How Children
That's the one
Learn?
that comes to mind.
Okay, very good.
I read so many books and went to
Yeah.
lots of conferences, and had really intelligent people working with me. So a lot of times we would have our supervisor meetings every 2 weeks, and it would last 4 hours because we just start talking and bouncing ideas off each other. I think having a collaborative effort is really important. If you're an owner of a childcare center, it can be really lonely if you're just by yourself. If you don't have some collaboration with your directors, your staff in some way.
Yeah, love that. My final question for you, Carol, is what is the one thing in your career that you wish that you could have done earlier?
Well, that is easy now that it is 2022. And, we're talking to each other in different states as if you're sitting right in front of me. So technology is something that it didn't come about for me till I was already, maybe 15 years into it. And, I can remember doing everything by hand, hours and hours to write ledger cards and class lists and everything. We only used pencils. We couldn't use pen because, things change too fast in childcare world. So technology with the onset of, like I'm just going to say ProCare, for example, we used them and we were probably one of their very first customers. Was a big game changer in the terms of having the time for the director to have more oversight over quality control, because that's really what I think a director should do is I used to tell my directors, you should never sit in your chair for more than 5 minutes. You need to be walking around and as if the building has no roof on it and you can see down at all times and see what's going on. Right. Is the program rich and full of good learning? Are the children safe? Is everybody having a good time? Right. So the technology really of what people have today is what I wish I had in the beginning. And one of the things was, you talked about a full school, all of that was done completely by hand. Somebody would call in or walk in your school, you give a tour. And the only way to make sure that person made an actual decision to enroll would be to follow them and call them back every 2 days and maybe leave when voice message on those little old-fashioned recorders and stuff. Uh-huh. So about, 3 years before I sold, one of my sons was into technology and Jared, and he provided a fabulous software for me that we kind of designed together and now it's taken off. For lead management, when somebody comes in and wants to see your school, you don't have to worry about whether or not they're contacted again because the system will automatically do it for you. Mm-hmm. Just like you don't have to worry if somebody's shot record is due because the system will say so-and-so needs to have such and such shot. They're at that age. Those things were all done by hand. Yeah. So I would say that if you use technology, and childcare as an industry is probably slow getting involved with technology. We're kind of behind the curve a little bit, but boy, I would highly recommend it for the main reason is to have enough time to ensure the quality of your program. Yeah. Then people will stay for their second child, their third child, tell their friends. And your school is nothing without children in it. So you've got to manage every single person that inquires about your school is your first child. And that's what I would tell my staff. So what if you are full and have a waiting list? You still spend the time because every child is their first child.
Yes, I love that. And I also believe one of the secrets of your success, Carol, has been staying in full schools because there's a lot of opportunity in those last 10 kids.
Absolutely.
Are everything in terms of being able to add all those extra bells and whistles to your program.
I used to tell my staff that it is easier, and I believe this wholeheartedly, it is easier to run a full school than a half full school. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just monetary, it's just the way the daily schedule flows. It's easier.
Yes, absolutely agree. I agree with you about technology. I am pulling people in to automate and get with it, get into the year 2022 here in ECE a lot of the time, with, you know, a little bit of frustration around slow adoption of technology. So thank you for saying that. I'm
I think
absolutely,
people are afraid of it, you know,
yeah,
and I think that once you take the plunge, you realize, oh my gosh, like if you don't use IntelliKid's system, which is that lead management,
yeah,
you need to get on it because it is amazing from a multi-site perspective, especially. You can find out that somebody across town is handling your calls correctly, your inquiries correctly. So
yeah. So love that. Shout out to your son, Jared, friend of mine, and IntelliKid Systems, CRM. We love it. So absolutely, you guys should adopt a CRM and be open to being a technology entrepreneur in this industry, because today's parents love tech. Today's parents are used to it. So we got to have great parent communication. We got to use apps. We got to have online forms. So Carol these days would not be known as the forms lady unless they were online, of course.
That's right. That is cool.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Carol. This has been an amazing conversation. I love all the wisdom and the, you know, experience that you bring to our listeners. It's been an amazing journey for you. I'm so grateful that you took the time to be with us here on Child Care Rockstar Radio today.
Well, thank you. And I'm very flattered. And if I can be of any help, just let me know. And I hope for success for all the people that are out there. And I know what it feels like to be in your shoes.
Absolutely. Y'all are in good company. All right. Well, thank you so much, Carol Levins, here on the podcast. Really appreciate you so much. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to be with us again. Big hugs to everybody. And we will talk to y'all soon. Take care and God bless.
Here. Bye-bye.
Bye.